Welcome again to the Iterative. Nope, still can't do it. My own podcast, and I cannot say the word iterative.
Iterative.
It's a bad word.
Iterative.
Yeah,
That's a difficult word to say under pressure.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then it's like,
Somebody
hey,
points
announce your podcast. Hey, what podcast do you have?
Puts a gun to your head, says, say the word
Podcast.
iterative. Yeah. Anyways.
Welcome to the Iterative approach. No, again, why? Okay. Welcome to the Iterative Approach podcast, where we talk about everything agile, development, delivery, and mindset. In this episode, we'll talk about the SCRUM framework in practice, going over expectations versus reality. So the origin of the topic is due to personal experience. Taught as a Scrum Master and the experience as a project manager, where there's a definite expectation of what we want to see out of development or project or even resources. But it came to my attention that there's a real gap between the expectations and actual reality, because we don't sit in the trenches with you guys doing development, going through iteration after iteration, struggling, I don't know, like the bugs and it's horrible. Like,
We don't produce bugs. So.
dude, I'm just so glad I'm not a developer. It's just talking about it gets me so anxious. But thank goodness we have guys like you, which we are joined by Gavin. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Cool. My name is Gavin Gregor. I'm a software developer. I've been working at Agile Bridge for 8 months, and I'm a team lead.
Awesome. Gav, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day.
Thank you so much for
I know
having me.
there's deadline on projects and stuff like that, so I really appreciate it. So I think I want to get into what Scrum is, right? So Scrum is, it's not a methodology, but more than a set of rules or kind of guidelines in executing big projects in smaller little chunks, right?
Yeah.
So starting off the top, right? So the product backlog. So product backlog, for the guys at home or people watching the podcast, it's basically the big overview and the dream of what the client wants at the end of the day. So my question to you, Gav, is in sprints and planning and all of those things, how much are you guys exposed to the actual product backlog in that big of a scope, regardless of how big or small the projects are?
Yeah, so I think it's always good. It's always a good thing within a team, especially a development team, to have a bigger picture in goal. So not necessarily being exposed to the entire backlog throughout a sprint, because your sprint in itself would be a small portion of whatever your backlog is trying to achieve, or your production backlog.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think having that goal in mind is very important, especially when you are finishing out a sprint, because it's super easy to get like that narrow perspective and not really knowing what you're aiming for, and falling into that trap. So yeah, I mean, people should be exposed to what the end goal is. However, don't think that permanent exposure throughout a sprint or generally thinking about the product
100%.
backlog all the time is a good idea. Yeah.
What you mentioned now is also the amount of exposure that you give to a developer. So in my experience, too much information for a developer kind of throws them off.
Yeah.
But then again, too little, they go, what am I doing?
Yeah, exactly.
So not that developers sound like that. There's just a couple that I know, so I do apologize for any developers that I might offend.
That's cool.
You guys are smarter than me, so I can take a swing. So how much is too much and how little is too little?
Yeah, so in the sprint backlog, specifically in the production backlog, I think, so you would generally scope things out inside of your product backlog as business requirements. So there's no real technological information inside there. There's no real technical scope or anything like that. So in that sense, it's good to have a high-level overview. So yes, if you're doing 3 features inside of a sprint that come from your backlog, it's a good idea to have your team understand what those different aspects inside of that sprint are. later on during a planning session or something like that, go into super detail. That's when you really want to share information with developers, not necessarily trying to get into it too much when you're at the product backlog stage or before you get into a sprint planning stage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So kind of preparing the guys and setting them up for the right amount of information.
Yeah.
So one of my go-to tools would be to include the selected developers in a client briefing session where the client kind of talks to business in regards to this is our dream, this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to do it, and all of that. So exposing them to that upfront and planting that little seed, because every time, and I feel like, again, my expectation is when they come to that feature, they go, oh, I remember that day because the client said X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So they'll go, hey guys, remember. So with that said, how much information do you guys actually retain from sessions like that? And do we need to kind of, as Scrum Masters or delivery teams, reiterate that to, like you said, in small quantities to the developers again?
Yeah, so I think, as you mentioned, a session like that with a client trying to get at the bigger picture is quite, it's priceless. I mean, if you're going to get that kind of information from a client, especially, I would say I wouldn't include an entire development team. So if you're a team of about 9 developers, maybe don't sit with everybody or invite them with, they could listen. Get a couple of key players, which has worked best for us in your team, and have them sit in those sessions so that they could really absorb the information. Because you're most likely going to have, during a planning session, you're most likely going to break down that information with the key players in your team, get that detail, and then distribute that within your team, and then make sure that everybody really understands it.
Yeah.
But I do think it's super important to have that technical requirement and the business requirement gap, and with meetings like that for sure,
Okay.
it's definitely. So, for example, a business analyst will go and get a lot of your business requirements, but your business requirements and your technical requirements don't always match up. So, for example, if you're...
Well, my expectation would be it's one and the same thing.
No, yeah. So, I mean, it's development, so we can pretty much do everything. But say, for example, we're working within the scope of a client's domain, right?
Yeah.
So, the client can come to us and say they want X, Y, and Z. But from a technical perspective, we might not be able to do that within their domain. Regulations, all that kind of stuff. A lot of technical things that feed into the information that the requirements that that business wants, and that actually technically possible, or might even require a lot of more technical work. I think bridging that gap is super important.
Cool.
And one of the ways to do that is in client relations with your team and your developers. Yeah.
And obviously those briefing sessions of when a client kind of brags to corporate going, hey, we are doing this, it'll be nice to kind of include the key players. So you mentioned that only key guys or key developers need to sit in those sessions. So how do you guys decide it? Is it like a round table? Is it dueling? Do you guys do like, I don't know, ching chong cha? How is that decided?
Yeah, so I think there's a balance between having your developers in meetings all the time, which is the reason why I would not want developers to be in meetings all the time with customers. So you want developers to develop, and you would generally want people like your team leads, your tech leads in those discussions. So when I say key people, I mean
the guys you like.
Yes, but not exactly. People that you aren't necessarily putting a lot of, not that team leads and tech leads don't do that. Let me not say that.
No. Okay.
The guys that you don't want sitting there coding 24/7.
Yeah.
You want to take people out of the team who need to do thinking and need to come up with solutions and need to find ways to distribute the information to the team in an efficient way without having everybody in meetings all the time, which is pretty much the...
But then doesn't that allow for like a kind of broken telephone thing? Let's say, for instance, I'm in charge of a project, but the team lead is maybe one of the smartest guys I know, but his communication skills and his personal skills are a little bit lacking. So How do you bridge that?
Don't have a team lead with bad communication skills.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. So I think it's from, as somebody who is a team lead, I think that's probably one of the most important pieces of being a team lead, or key parts of being a team lead. If you can't communicate information between your team accurately, then you either need to find a new way of communicating with your team, or you need to put enough resources into yourself where you can learn to do something like that for sure.
That's awesome.
And that's especially, it happened with us a couple of times as well, where you go into a sprint in the beginning of a sprint and you do planning, and everybody in your team says, yes, no, we understand everything.
Oh yeah, I love those.
Good.
Everyone is like,
yes,
I got this. Don't worry about it. There's nothing. And
give
I'm
me
sitting,
more tickets, capacity. Yeah, and then you get into the sprint, and then you get bombarded with questions of people not understanding things that you planned out with them.
Yeah.
I think, and if I'll go to the sprint planning section of Scrum, it's probably one of the most important pieces for me.
100%, and which is a great segue into to kind of my next question is, in sprint planning, it's for items or priority items from the product backlog to be put in an iteration to get developed, right? So in a sprint, you should always, and my expectations again, you should always be able to produce a workable piece of software or a workable piece of feature.
Yeah.
So saying that, with the sprint values, sprint commitments, and the sprint expectations, does the Scrum Master or project manager on your teams, do they reiterate that every time before you go into a sprint, or what do you guys do to prepare for a sprint to actually deliver on those sprint values?
Yeah, so I think, so generally when you go into a sprint planning session, your idea is, so you have a set goal, and that's why you have a sprint. You break everything, like you mentioned, in your product backlog. You take specific pieces in your product backlog, you find a specific goal within that set of items in your product backlog, put them in a sprint. That goal should never change. So when you have that goal,
goals should never change. You go like this. I'm pretty sure that goal changes constantly, right?
No, the sprint changes. That's the whole point of Scrum. You can take things out, put things in, but your end product within the sprint should never change.
Okay.
Yeah. So to your question, the value that comes out of the sprint planning is all determined by the amount of information you can share in a sprint planning session, really. So like I said earlier, if and this is something I like to do as well, is before you have a sprint planning session, distribute knowledge between your team, as much knowledge as you can about the items that are going into that sprint. Okay. So we can say, hey, X, Y, and Z is going into sprint. Let's try and break this down. Let's have some kind of way where we can get communication flowing, and let's get people's brains working before a planning session. Because it's super easy, like we said earlier, to jump into a planning session, break out some tasks, and people say, shoot, we're good, and then we go. Because if you don't have the knowledge and the deep knowledge that goes into the work that you're building, then you're basically just setting out an umbrella
so,
and then trying to...
quick question from my side is, are you guys lucky enough to have a very competent BA or business analyst or a product owner on your side getting that information for you?
Yeah, 100%. I think our BAs are super awesome. I think they definitely don't get the praise that they deserve.
Yeah, of course.
Relating with the client and trying to get that information out of them and actually turning it into something useful, which we do have, is quite freaking awesome. Yeah. So that, as I said earlier, relates to that business requirement, technical requirement gap. If you have terrible BAs, that's going to be a super difficult thing to do.
Or how about, what would your advice be for teams that has no BA? There's no product owner or anything. It's kind of I love it when people use this startup agile approach for doing things, which in their mind, the expectation is, hey, we don't need to plan. They know everything in my head as the client, so they just need to build.
Yeah.
So what's your advice to, or what would you do to mitigate that kind of like really bizarre behavior which we see all the time?
Yeah, so I think if you don't have BAs and you're relating straight to the customer, you are going to have one busy life, super busy life that does nothing to do with development.
Yeah.
So that's why we have BAs. So we break things out into sections where people can focus on a key point.
Yeah.
So yes, that in itself is super difficult to take over that role.
Do you think a client can actually fulfill that role?
Yeah, so I think that's what the next thing I was getting at. So definitely having constant communications with your client on what you're doing, and what is required from your team is probably your best bet. I mean, that's pretty much what a business analyst is. You going to the client and saying, hey, we're building this set of specifications that you want according to the goal that you are trying to achieve. Yeah. Does this fit in your goal? And how can we adjust it to give you the product that you want?
Awesome. Cool. So from the sprint reviews, I just want to touch and kind of go into expectations for the daily scrum and what you guys actually do. So the daily scrum is pretty much a 15-minute time box each and every day where, as a scrum master, again, my expectation is 15 minutes, you guys get everything sorted out, the board gets updated, everyone is happy, impediments are talked about and linked or sorted out afterwards. So what's the value, what's the actual value that you guys get out of these, and do you actually do the daily scrums?
Yeah, so daily scrums is something that we do, definitely. It's a very, very, very important aspect of Scrum, I think. And I think the most value we really pull out of it is just to see if things are still on track. And then obviously raising issues and trying to identify blockers and dependencies so that you can resolve them. So yes, I think that's probably the main, I guess, key points of value that you pull out of a daily stand-up. Yeah. With regard to actually resolving those issues and,
Well, it should be just noted or noted kind of down. Yeah. And then after the sprint or the daily scrum, it should be sorted out.
Yeah.
So what happens if, because you get really like passionate people, right? Passionate developers, all those guys, they want to sort out stuff now.
Yeah.
So what happens in that little time box if people get going and saying, hey, listen, we need to sort this out, I've got this issue, and they go down the rabbit hole? Yeah. Is there a strict rule in your teams, or do you allow for that conversation to happen to get value out of it, or is it like taking value away when two guys have a problem and the rest of the guys sit there and do nothing?
Yeah, so I definitely think rambling on in a sprint stand-up is definitely detracting value from what it's supposed to be. Yeah. So yes, if you're trying to if the whole purpose of it is we need to see where we're standing, and then we need to raise blockers so that we can talk about or discuss it afterwards. Mm-hmm. You sitting there talking about your issue and why you're having the issue and how you can resolve the issue, everybody else sitting there is going, bruh, can we get this done so afterwards we can? And that's why we personally have an hour after our sprint planning, we call a peer coding session, where everything that was raised inside of a stand-up, all the issues, all the blockers, stuff like that, dependencies, we resolve afterwards inside of that hour gap. So it kind of gives people not only the ability to quickly run through everything that they've done in a 15-minute time period, but it also gives them the opportunity to raise it so that afterwards we can look at it and fix it. So a new junior developer that walks in tomorrow is going to be super stressed out in a sprint or in a stand-up because he doesn't want to sit there for like 10 minutes talking about all of his issues. He gets to raise it, go outside of the planning session of the stand-up that generally has like clients and things like that in it. Basically just takes the pressure.
Do you guys allow clients in your stand-ups?
We do have, clients in I think 2 out of the 5 stand-ups we have a week.
I've been in some stand-ups. There's some roughhousing going on in there because effectively it's pointing out what the issues are. So do you expose the client to that kind of finger pointing thing, or do you guys kind of handle it more like these are the issues that we have as a team, we are resolving it afterwards?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely for a client to be there and be aware of what's going wrong is important. Not necessarily what's going wrong, but also what's going right. It's like, yes, we finished
Yeah.
this today. Yesterday. Today I'm starting on this, and this, and I plan to finish it. That's super good for a client to get that kind of feedback, and also to know that, okay, for example, if your product owner is sitting in a meeting and he hears, okay, we have a dependency because our environments aren't up, I can escalate that to whoever I need to. So I don't think it's a kind of a blaming kind of a thing. It shouldn't be something like that. It should
That's
just
awesome.
be, let's tackle the problem,
Yeah,
try and
yeah.
get the problem sorted kind of a thing. So yes, I think it's super important for clients to be in some of those meetings. Yeah, it gives a lot of clarity to them.
Yeah.
And that's what Scrum is, right? We're trying to bring clarity to the client so that they get what they want.
Because I just wanted to mention, because I made a note here, that when you were talking about the product backlog and getting the guys involved and even the sprint planning, the word communication kept popping up. So even in stand-ups in the morning, where it should be like literally quick 15-minute meeting and everything, you guys use to add value, not just for the teams itself, but actually for the client,
100%.
just to kind of get them involved as well.
Yeah. 100%,
So
yeah.
you don't see the client every 2 weeks when you go, hey, this is our review. You see them each and every day.
Yeah. Well, yes, as much as we can.
Obviously, like you said, the 2 out of the 5 times.
Yeah.
So those other 3 days, gloves off, and let's brawl.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So speaking of sprint reviews, my expectations, and like personally my expectations for a sprint review is, which also our CTO really loves to say, it's not really a review session, but more a bragging session, right? Because it's focusing on what was done and like what can we improve afterwards. But first of all, this is how cool we are, kind of thing, right? So my expectation is a full set of release notes to the client, test cases that they can test those things, because my expectation is, again, just my expectation, not what it has to be, but my expectation would be everything is then released onto staging or an environment that the client can actually go into and test these things. So release notes, test cases, and my personal favorite, and I think the thing that I love doing, is recording a video of what was done. What's the situation with your team?
Yeah, so I think a sprint review in itself is very specific. Thanks for laughing at me. Yeah, it's okay.
No, I'm just look. It's the review in my opinion. It always gets lost because, like you said, guys get really focused, and if there's issues and stuff popping up the whole time because the sprint changed or there's new requirements or something moved out, came back in the way it should, they don't feel they have that full deliverable item that they can present. So sometimes those things, and especially those 3 things that I say, like falls away completely. So what's the value?
Yeah, so I think the value out of it is what I was going to mention, is that it's very client specific and very, very project specific. If your client doesn't want to see one at the end of every sprint necessarily, but they want to see it after 3 iterations, and then see your hard work and your bragging session or whatever they want to see. I guess it's very specific to that, but I think the value that comes out of it is definitely to show them what has been done and that everything that you have done is actually there. So that they also can give you feedback on what has been completed, if anything needs to change.
So I think I want to challenge you on that one a little bit. So in Agile Bridge, one of our values is service to the client, which is 100% what we live for, right? But what about service to your peers and new people coming in? Don't you think it's going to be valuable if you have 2-week or 3-week iteration videos showing how the thing actually works, rather than sitting with the guy that just got onboarded and go, hey, this is how you do it. You clicky here and then you clicky there. By the way, to the guys at home, development for me is clicky, clicky, draggy, draggy. So
you just sit there and push tab the whole time. That's what
100%. It's autofill, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I look at your screens. I 100% look at your screens. Like, anyway, but regardless. So wouldn't that add value to guys coming in?
Yeah.
Still, keeping to the foundations of having your release notes, because that keeps track of everything. Test cases. Somebody needs to test it. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
Right? So again, why only focus on the client's value and not think about the guys actually in the process? Because don't you think, because development is really tough, right? If you develop for 3 to 6 months and you don't see the value, as a person, you're going to go, ugh, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't, because it's a physical thing. You don't see value.
Yeah.
That's why people love working in the garden or fixing something, because you can see the results then and there. So why take away that feeling to your devs not to feel accomplished and, oh, wow, this is our brag. Even if it's internal, even if you show it off to the company, that adds value, right?
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. Yeah, I do think that it's actually something I've never thought of. So good point, fair point.
Thank
good
you.
enough. Yeah, no, I think that's actually sort of a cool eye opener. And as you were speaking now, I've worked on.
I saw it ticked, and it's like, oh man, I wish I had that in my other projects when I came on.
Yeah, I was thinking about a previous project I've worked on, and we were just sitting there developing things for the client, and nothing ever got put into production, nothing ever got out, and it became freaking terrible because you're sitting there developing. So yes, I think.
And let me ask you, it's still haunting you, right?
Yeah,
because
well,
you don't have that closure.
You brought out the PTSD while you were speaking there.
It's okay. It's what I do. I bring the best out of people.
Yeah, so I 100% agree with you. I think in that sense, I think if you're looking at your team in a whole and having that, like you said, a recording of how things work and how the product's progressed, and even just getting together with your team at the end of a sprint and saying, hey, what have we done? Can we look at this and be satisfied? Even that maybe is an eye opener. Saying, okay, we haven't done enough here. There's things that are missing.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
And also another thing is, which is kind of a personal thing for me, is the reason why I force the guys to do a recording is, in your experience, how many developers retest their stuff after it's been pushed to production, staging, UAT, whatever?
Yeah, true.
Right?
Got you.
Doesn't that force them to go, oh, wow, I have to walk through this? And then sometimes you pick up.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we didn't think about this. Then it goes back to, let's say, the requirements. Maybe there was something missing in the requirement. So iteratively, you as the developer are actually helping, like you mentioned, the great BAs that's working for you guys, enabling them to kind of add another little checklist to all the requirements coming down the line.
Yeah, that's quite cool. Yeah.
I know, right?
Yeah, I think should just
my soul.
Bring you into our sprint meetings.
100%. But then again, you guys are way, way, way smarter than me. Also very dear to my heart, and I don't know where it came from, but at Agile Bridge there was an explosion of creative retrospectives where the guys are super interactive, guys are dressed up, they get real value out of it. In your team, how high do you regard, or how highly regarded is retrospectives? What's the value? And just from your perspective, not anything about what you read up or what it should be.
Yeah.
Like not from my expectation side, but in reality, what's the benefits of a good or even a bad retro?
So I think, as a team lead in itself, your number one goal as a team lead is to try and get your team as efficient as possible. So you need to get your team into a space where you are doing everything right so that they can do everything right.
Okay.
Right? For them, you are that person that they can go to and make everything easier for them. So in that sense, I think a retrospective is most probably, for me as a team lead, one of the most important parts of a sprint, besides getting the requirements to your team and getting the information distributed into the team so that they understand what they're doing, but also reflecting on what has been done during the sprint, and then finding out what didn't work, what did work, what should you continue doing, what makes your development easier, what makes your development more difficult. So it's I think as a team lead, it's probably one of the most important parts of a sprint, 100%.
So I don't want to put you on the spot here,
Go for it.
but how do you track, let's say, like you mentioned now, things to improve? How do you track that?
So generally during a retrospective, if you have a good Scrum Master, which most of our Scrum Masters are,
I'm pretty sure the other is me, right? But anyway.
All of them are great.
Continue. No, it's too late now. It's too late now.
So they would generally keep track on some kind of board or some kind of list, what went well. So everybody before the retrospective will get a list of, hey guys, we're doing what went well, what didn't go well, what should we improve, all that kind of questions to reflect on what happened during the sprint. And then they would preemptively go and fill out a list of things that they would like to discuss during the retrospective. During the retrospective, your Scrum Master would generally keep track of everything that's going down there. And if you really have a good Scrum Master, they would go and summarize everything for you. So that's generally what you would use to keep track of, what's going well, what's not going well. And that's an ongoing living thing. So
okay, 100%.
Yeah,
I can also make lists. I love making lists.
Yeah.
To do tasks, I love it. I've got my notes and everything in front of me, right? How do you execute those? You don't, do you?
Me? What do you mean? Of
No,
course I do.
I'm asking. Like, let's say, for instance, you guys have trouble with integrations, right? There's a fundamental flaw that you picked up, let's say, in integrations. How do you guys, from a retro, go beyond that and go, hey, here's a reminder or to-do list of go? Because everything's online these days, right?
Yeah.
You have online documents and everything. That's the worst.
Yeah.
Back in the day, when you had a camera, not digital, normal camera. I don't know. My producer will probably tell me what kind of camera they used to use. But with everything going digital, how many photos do you have by taking digital pictures? How many have you printed out? 0.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I guess.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, what happens to documented improvements? We have to do this. What happens to it?
Yeah, so I mean that's generally something that's documented is what you revisit in the next sprint, but not only yes, not only something you revisit, or you should be.
Ooh, shoulda, coulda, woulda. So
and if I can just explain
the
rest of that. So I think everything that is mentioned within a retrospective should be turned into an action point that you implement during the sprint. So, for example,
but you use the word should. So I'm guessing I just prompted something now, and then you go, oh shit, I need to do that.
No,
right?
we're definitely doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. Action points, all of them. Yeah,
Okay.
no, 100%. Okay. So, I mean, for example, okay, well, I could get into detail of specific things, but for example, your pull requests aren't going great. Why are your pull requests not going great? How do we fix this problem? Turn it into an action point, put in proper pull request templates, and make sure that everything is functionally tested or unit tested. That now is an action point that you put into the next sprint and is a requirement for your pull request to go through.
Very cool.
Something like that.
Okay.
Is generally how you do that. And then that also gets revisited in the next retrospective. So now we put this into place. Has it worked? No. Yes. Do we need to revisit it again, or can we take it off the list and carry on with our lives?
Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
So iteratively you use. Now I can say the word, not on my intro.
Not in the beginning.
Yeah. But so iteratively, you guys then small little chunks you improve and actually put, like you said, no. So action items could be either from a to-do list that the whole team sees, or you can even put it in your board, right? Yeah. Because you can put it in as a task and you have people responsible for it and you can action it and all that kind of stuff.
100%, yeah.
Okay.
So it should actions, or what words are dead without actions. If you're gonna sit in the retrospective and speak about a bunch of problems, then not do anything about them or put them into
and that's the thing. People love airing everything.
Yeah.
But then 2 weeks later, what happens?
Nothing. Which is difficult.
Oh, it's the same. It's the same thing. Okay.
I mean, it's super difficult to keep track of all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So your best bet is probably, if it was me trying to implement something, my best bet would be, hey, let's make action points out of this and enforce it.
Cool.
Enforce is a terrible word.
It is, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
enforce, mandatory. Yeah, I'm going to hear that tomorrow. But the thing is, the action list coming out of it. That's the best thing. So I think the last question on the retros is something that confuses me, right? Because my expectation is in a retro, the guys should feel very safe, regardless of who they are, what they do, to state what is the issue. It can be a person or it can be a process, but just every time there's an issue, there's questions going, why wasn't this raised in the retro? What's happening? So how would you improve that to like really get, like even if it gets brawly,
Heated.
it's fine.
Yeah.
It should be, right? Because
I mean,
it's not personal.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be personal.
Yeah. So I mean, once again, it comes back to the person facilitating your meetings when you get into a retrospective, that it should be super clear to everybody within that meeting that this is the purpose of our retrospective. We are trying to bring out everything that went wrong in the sprint, and it's not a personal thing. It's not an attack to somebody else.
Yeah.
Yes, don't go onto a retrospective and be a douche, tell somebody that they're freaking stupid or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it needs to be clear to everybody that is in the retrospective what the purpose of and why we're doing the retrospective. What's the value out of this? We need to, as you said earlier, improve. That's the whole point of a retrospective. Our CTO always says it, like, we want to be the best damn development team on the face of this planet.
Yeah.
How do we do that in a retrospective?
Yeah.
We got to go in there and we got to sort out everything.
Yeah.
That's kind of
the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
I don't like your face. It's okay.
And
Your
we can
code
work
is great.
past that. Yeah.
And that's how we go on.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Then the other question is whether you should have your clients within a retrospective meeting.
That is okay. So, in my personal opinion, there's two retros. There's a personal retro where you iteratively improve, and then there's a company retro, right? A project retro. Like after everything, hey, what did we do well? So it's kind of giving feedback to the client themselves on, if you think about something, don't just throw it on a board.
Yeah.
How about, get a process in place. Let's talk about the requirements first and then put it in.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing. So there's a place and a time for a client, but in improvement retros, my feeling is no clients allowed, not even management.
Do we regularly have, with most of the projects that you're involved with, have sessions with the client where we
I would
hash
love
things
to.
out?
I would love to.
I think it's
I would absolutely
something
love
that
to.
could be, valuable to
Yeah.
a sprint.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
look, we do get either a good review on a project, some good feedback, or we get phone calls, and then especially to our CEO, phone calls get made, and then you hear it, right? So I would love to have those kind of conversations, not as a result of something or as a influence of something. I would really like to have a open conversation with the client, which also means you're going to have to train the client in understanding what a retro is.
Yeah.
Because
it's not personal. Yes.
Some clients can go, I'm pretty sure there's clients out there in the world. Luckily, none of ours, right?
Yeah.
Like we've got the best. But in the world, there's some brawlers there.
For
so,
sure.
yeah.
Or the occasional dev that will try and get his jab in
a
retrospective meeting.
100%.
So yeah, within a scrum, obviously you need key players to perform or to act out the scrum. If that makes sense.
Are you talking about the role players in the Scrum team?
Yes.
In the kind of Scrum dictionary, it consists of a product owner, Scrum master, and then obviously your development team.
Yes. Yeah. So my question is pretty much, so if there's either a lack of roles, so there's people bridging roles, trying to do too many things at the same time, or there's, I don't really want to say people are lacking in the sense that they aren't performing what they need to. How can I say? The requirements from them aren't being
met.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay. Because that's kind of a weird, that's like a completely different situation where you should take it up with somebody else in the company, generally like an HR or, communicate that upwards.
You
I don't really want to
went
go
to HR quickly, but okay. Yeah. I mean,
well,
maybe.
what happens,
Yeah. But on that topic, we'll go back to your question now, right? But within the Scrum team, do you feel the need for HR to kind of step in, or shouldn't the process and we discussed tonight all the steps through the Scrum kind of flesh that out and get them back in line, because you have your retros, you have your daily stand-ups and stuff like that. So do you think that HR is needed?
Yeah, so that's pretty much why I wanted to exclude that statement.
Because
I mean, I don't think that's really the flow within a Scrum. I mean, either it's going to sort itself out, or you are going to have, like I said, other people overarching into the roles, doing too many things or trying to eat too much of the pie at the same time. So exclude that out of the question. But yes, fair point. I think that throughout your retrospectives or throughout a Scrum process, you should be weeding out those issues.
Yeah. I just thought you were going to say weeding out the weeds and the people.
Crop. No. We're
like, wow.
Always believe in giving people more than one chance, right?
Okay. How many do you give?
More than one chance.
Okay. So, up until it's...
Before calling HR one. No, but other than that, no, I'm joking.
Okay. But yeah, I think that kind of comes out, within the team as well. But then... it's such a hard thing. Like, how do you keep motivation and delivery up when you have people like that, or even clients? Like, trust me, I've had clients in my life where they expect the world from you.
Yeah.
But in reality, I'm sitting here going, hey, Mr. Client, I've sent you 58 emails already. I tried to phone you like 28 times, but there's nothing coming back. But on D-Day, or when his exco chats to him, he goes, hey, what's happened to the money we spent? And then they go, oh, yeah, listen, you, Agile Alchemist, aka Herman, where's my stuff? I'm like, I don't know. So, but yeah, it kind of goes both ways. And hopefully you find yourself in a position where the team itself kind of protects everyone around them, or the company protects the developers when there's like a toxic relationship with the client, which unfortunately does happen in the industry. So, sorry, back to your question. What was it?
So that exact thing is, when you're in a situation like that, there are people there's key players, and I mean, it's easy for somebody to take on more responsibility than what they should, and then just run with it and burn themselves out.
So do you know what the problem is with taking on extra responsibility? Is the risk involved, not just for the client, but for the company that you work for or your employer, right? Because yes, it's very easy to raise your hand going, hey, I'm Gavin, I know everything, I can do everything, right? So, but what happens if something goes wrong? Who's held responsible, or who's held accountable for those additional things that you are trying to do? Because in the end of the day, if you are a developer, you can only be a great developer when you put your focus, energy, and blood, sweat, and tears into it.
Yeah.
If you kind of start pulling yourself into other directions, your output does suffer. So, answer from my side would be, do as much as you can to ensure risk is low for you or the client. And if it comes to it, go, hey guys, these are the facts. This is our burn down. If we're going into that kind of way, this is the burn down. We can't produce any more than we can because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
That's why the retros are so important.
Yeah.
Because, hey, help, we're sinking.
Yeah.
But if you don't mention it, then nobody knows. If I don't know as a project manager that somebody is struggling, again, expectation versus reality, my expectation is, hey, you got to work. And then they go, I'm like, why are you crying? What's wrong with you? And then everything comes out. And then again, my questions are, but you had like 6 retros.
Yeah, got you.
Where's this coming from? Right? So, like you preached tonight, communication, communication, communication.
Got you.
Do that with the people around you. We are here. We are a team. Everyone is a team. Just open your mouth and go help. There's nothing wrong with asking for help.
100%. So
Directions, don't do that. Men don't do that.
the framework itself should,
Yeah.
in essence, resolve that issue. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
So, quick question, right? So, a little bit more of a discussion thing going on now is with the framework and the process that we discussed tonight, which is Scrum. In standard or as taught, there's a certain things or a certain pattern that you need to follow. There's certain things that you do at certain times. Do you think it's possible to change those processes within Scrum to fit either a specific team or a specific client? What's your kind of feeling of kind of not really breaking the rules, but kind of bending it when it comes to Scrum? Do you think it's a good idea?
Yeah. So I think if you're looking at the purpose of what Scrum does, and it's pretty much trying to break things into smaller portions that you can process and deliver, making your team as efficient as you can.
Yeah.
If you still have that main focus in goal, and you're changing Scrum to make your team as efficient as you can, and it works for you, and you can see that the results play out, and I think it's 100% worth it. I don't think you should ever conform to something just for the sake of conforming to it. Yeah,
that's a very good point.
Yeah, that's
So, especially with that is usually they say, and this is just quickly running through all these values or processes that we spoke about Scrum, is a stand-up is 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So my experience is a stand-up can be an hour. Does that make sense to you? Okay.
Yeah,
on your face
so
it says no.
That's
right?
that's a bit of a
Okay.
difficult one, because I mean technically you should have them 15 minutes. If your team works more efficiently by sitting there for an hour and talking about your problems,
That's
then
the answer I was looking
sure
for.
you can.
Yeah.
100%.
If the value is still there,
Yeah.
doesn't matter how long a stand-up is.
Yeah.
The fact is, you are getting the guys in a room or virtual room together, talking about what they did yesterday, what are they doing today, and if there's any impediments or they need any help. If that takes an hour and there's value out of it, go for it.
100%. Yeah. So maybe don't do that with the client.
No.
So if you have the client there, keep it 15 minutes and then break out afterwards and have a discussion. But 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So like you said, if there's value to it, then 100% do it. But then again, also like we mentioned, if it's an hour and there's no value and people are just like, I
Dozing
can't
off.
sit,
then
then
what's the
it's not going to work like that. So for retros, how long do you guys do retros for?
Retrospectives, we generally put out about 3 hours.
Cool.
Does normally not take 3 hours.
Yeah. Okay.
Generally about 3 hours. It's enough time for you to just book it out on your calendar, because max you'll probably sit there for about 3 hours talking about problems or talking about what went good.
Yeah.
If your team is super big, maybe 3 hours, but generally around about there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And obviously, if it is 3 hours, the value that you get out of it, and those action points that you mentioned, that's worth 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
So every time I think about, and I don't know why I'm wired this way, but if I see a meeting, the first thing I do is I look at the attendance. I kind of gauge how the level of what that person is, and then I put a total to that.
Okay.
Right? So then I go, okay, this meeting is 2 hours. It's like, So within that 2 hours, I need to get X amount of value, which I can quantify because it's a rand value. I have it right in front of me.
Yeah.
So when I have meetings and guys go, okay, so man, sorry, what was the agenda again, guys? I want to get out of my skin. Like I'm like, it takes a lot for me to kind of get that down. But if I see something like that, I see the value, and that's why I'm for a retro for 3 hours, 100%, because the value gets out of it, because that money, in brackets or air quotes, that we spent is worth the iterative improvements that the team is actually getting.
100%, yeah. And I think your facilitator also plays a huge role maybe not a meeting in itself. That is also a super good point. If you're sitting in any kind of meeting, or if you're the one facilitating a meeting, in the case of a Scrum Master facilitating a retrospective, if your Scrum Master gets into a meeting and says, okay, well, guys, so what went well? And then everybody just sits there. So it also depends on your facilitator and how much value they can extract out of a retrospective. I always think it's very important for the person facilitating a meeting to have an agenda, to be prepared for the meeting, and then get the action points out of the meeting and why you're having the meeting. It's super important to have whenever you're getting into a planning session, meeting, your daily stand-up, everything like that. Facilitator is probably, if they don't know what they're doing, then you're there for no value.
So do you think, like just hopping back to the question you asked about the roles, that's kind of the facilitator role, right? But do you think that can be kind of copied and inherited by us normal folks as well? Like if a developer sets up a meeting, the expectation now, thank you for that, from my side would be there would be an agenda. He is going to be prepared, and it's going to be as efficient and valuable as possible.
It should be.
Cool. That's literally on my little checklist, all my expectations. Especially that's been added now.
If you're talking to clients or you're having meetings with clients, I mean, the last thing you want to do is go into a meeting and not know what the hell you're talking about to a client. What's the point of your meeting if you're extracting zero value out of it and you're just pissing off the client?
And do you think it's fair to not continue with a meeting if those elements are not there?
I think if you're the one facilitating a meeting and you schedule a meeting for 2 hours, and before the meeting you see, okay, I'm not prepared for this, I'm not going to be able to extract enough, 100% cancel it.
Cool. Cut your losses.
Cut your losses. Get the hell out of Dodge, bro.
Okay. So again, be willing to kind of make a mistake and correct it. So 100%. Next time you go, I don't want to feel like that again, or I don't want to waste anyone's time. And, not very long ago, I was in a similar situation. It was expected of me to be prepared, and kind of went into it, got busy with other things, went into the meeting, kind of fluffed myself through it. And I was just told, like, no. Be prepared for it. And then retrospectively, I went back and I'm like, it was 100% I was in the wrong, because I wasn't prepared for it, and I didn't see the value at that time, which I live by, but for some reason I didn't see it in that one meeting. But hey, it's something that haunts me and makes me cry at night, but it's okay. We'll get over it. So with all your research and with all the experience that you have, especially as a team lead, what is your perception? And again, my previous guests, I asked, don't give me any rehearsed answers or whatever.
Cool.
In your perspective, what is Scrum?
So I think in my mind, the thing that makes the most sense whenever somebody says Scrum, or why we are implementing Scrum, or what's the purpose of Scrum, if I had to look at a project, and this is just how my brain works, if I had to look at a project and say, okay, this is going to take us this amount of time to do, right? Like the whole project. I mean, you'd be sitting there.
You're looking up to that mountain and you go like, I am not fit enough for this.
Not at all. So in itself, just taking up that, and I think it's a really good problem solving kind of way of thinking about things. If you have this problem, how can you solve this problem? Just take it into small chunks, put it into little features, if you can call it that, and then try and one by one knock each one down until you have a final solution. So to me, that is what Scrum is. It's basically trying to take a complex solution, a complex problem, break it down into its fundamental elements, and then knock it down one by one.
Ooh, fundamental elements. I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And that's pretty much it, eh?
That's
the
awesome.
rest of the stuff, facilitating people. I mean, yeah.
That kind of comes as you go along and as you get better at being Scrum or using Scrum.
Yeah.
That kind of fits through it.
100%. So if your main goal is to try and knock out these small portions to get a goal done,
Yeah.
I think you are probably on the first step to successfully implementing Scrum as a framework.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Dude, that's all I have for you. Thank you so
Sweet.
much. It was an absolute blast having you on.
Thank you very much
And,
for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being smart.
Yeah.
Really appreciate
I
it.
don't know about that one, but it's a pleasure.
Thanks, man.
Sweet. Thank you to our sponsor, Agile Bridge. Their unique blend of experience, accreditation, and in-depth business knowledge drive the crafting of integrated and empowering software solutions to medium and large corporate clients. Find out more by visiting agilebridge.co.za or send us an email to info@agilebridge.co.za.